to the presentations. So, assalamu alaikum, good morning everyone, good afternoon everyone. I can still see some of us, including me, are in the post-Juma biryani hangover. I'm Abdullah, assistant professor at the School of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts, and also associate director at the Karachi Urban Lab. And today, the title of our panel is Urban Mental Health, which is, looking at how our conceptions of urban mental health and its linearity should be challenged. So we are very excited to have with us today a transdisciplinary set of speakers whose intellectual domains span from architectural design to urban design to psychopathology and family medicine and clinical therapy as well. So Professor Renaud, who is our first speaker, he is a professor of psychopathology. Dr. Shamil, who is a practicing psychiatrist. Dr. Saima, who is an academic and clinical counselor. Dr. Rabia, a behavioral coach and therapist. And Dr. Tanzil Shafiq, who is an architect and an urban designer. So I would like to invite our speakers onto the stage. So, welcome to the panelists and the audience. The objective of this session, this panel, is to view urban mental health from a point of view of urban living. So we know that gradually the world is moving towards urbanization. We have projections from the United Nations Population Division as well as national bodies such as the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, which predict that within a few decades, a majority of the population of the country, of the region, will be urban, right? And with that comes a lot of interlinked physical and mental health impacts. So this panel kind of aims to raise provocative questions and critiques around how we conceptualize mental health, how we conceptualize access to mental health, how we conceptualize the representation, interpretation of mental health, and how do we communicate about mental health across languages and across cultural practices and belief systems. So I would like to invite our first speaker, who is Professor Reinout Weers, for this talk. Professor Weers is Professor of Developmental Psychopathology at the Department of Psychology in the University of Amsterdam, where he also leads the Addiction Development and Psychopathology Lab, ADAPT. He is co-director of the University of Amsterdam's Center for Urban Mental Health since its inception in 2019, and is internationally known for his work on assessing and changing implicit cognitive processes in addiction. Professor Weers has published widely, including over 400 international research papers and numerous books and book chapters. He has received the very prestigious Vidi and Vici research grants from the Dutch National Science Foundation for research on implicit cognition and addiction. Professor Weers, welcome to the panel, and the Zoom mic is yours.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to address you. I hope you can hear me. Is it all right? The sound?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. And of course, it would have been even better to meet you guys in person, but I guess this is the more sustainable alternative. So, yes, we have the Center for Urban Mental Health. It started some 4 years ago. And our mission is to find new pathways to improve mental health in the city. And we use complexity science, so this is also why we say from complexity to action to promote mental health. It's the largest research priority of the University of Amsterdam, and it's truly interdisciplinary. So we have scientists from 3 faculties, and all of them are big influential faculties, like the Faculty of Natural Sciences and Math, where we have people from neurobiology, math, and modeling. The Faculty of Social and Behavioral Sciences, I'm in psychology, but we also have people from sociology, communication, and pedagogical science, and then medicine with psychiatry, pediatrics, and public health. We meet at the Institute for Advanced Studies, which is also truly interdisciplinary, at a weekly basis. And then there are projects within each of these 3 faculties. So as you already mentioned in the introduction, the prospects by United Nations is that now over half is already living in cities, but this will soon reach 2/3 of people. And there is a nonlinear correlation between the urbanization level in a country and the occurrence of the three common mental disorders, anxiety, depression, and substance use disorders. As you see here, this is part of our paper in Lancet Psychiatry. There is this relationship. So as urbanization gets higher in a country, you get more of these common mental disorders, where it starts to really increase when you are over 50%. Some more research from the center here. This is actually on British data. The distance to the center of a city was calculated, and then for all sorts of outcome measures. For example, living close to the city center is good for your income, as you can see on the left, the top. But people are less satisfied with their jobs and even more with how much they earn. So there's some discrepancy going on here. And as you see in the right graph, it's basically bad for all sorts of mental health outcomes. So as I already said, we embrace complexity. And the common mental disorders, so these are anxiety, depression, and addiction, are in the top 5 of the most prevalent and costly of all mental and brain disorders in Europe. For a long time, researchers have been searching a single cause, for example, a brain disease. Where in the brain can you see that people are depressed or addicted? But we now know this is basically a fallacy. It's really a multifactorial problem with determinants at different levels, from, of course, biological ones, genes, neurobiology, to psychological ones, perceived threat, but also a lot that's really induced by the environment, like perceived discrimination. One influential approach now in psychopathology, which actually originated here in the University of Amsterdam, people like Denny Borsboom and actually Kramer, is the network approach to psychopathology, where it's not so much about some underlying common cause or brain disease, but about the interaction between different symptoms. And that we can look at as a complex systems, and we can model those. So if you look at this graph, which is also from the Lancet Psychiatry paper, you can see on the right hand this interaction between symptoms. And one thing you can see, that often symptoms have a role in different mental health conditions. And so there is overlap, there are bridge symptoms, etc. So the circle around the symptoms here is an individual, and of course there are individual factors that influence how this network of symptoms develops. But what we also say here in this paper, there are really also all these factors at other levels, like your social level, your family, your work, etc., but also more urban factors, and then how these interact to produce mental health problems, and then also feedback loops. So it can be that, you know, you get stressed in your urban environment, in your work, you get back home, and you get even more stressed because of the living conditions, and then you develop depression, start drinking, etc. And if a lot of people in this area of the city start doing that, of course the whole area goes down and has more of a depressing effect. Just one example of this type of feedback loops. It's important to also note that they're at different time scales, as you see in the middle temporal scales. So on the individual level, people fluctuate in their moods, in their stress levels. Societal, social level, we talk more about months, weeks, how things change. But the urban level can be a matter of life, and a lot of places get more and more urban. So you see things change over a lifetime, really. So we finished the first period of urban mental health, and from January we will be into the second phase where we have a focus on interventions, and we aim to identify modifiable feedback loops related to common mental disorders, again, anxiety, depression, addiction, and will help to understand and optimize interventions from a systems perspective. We are also very interested to look at combined effects from interventions at different levels. So, for example, not only address the individual, but maybe also the family or neighborhood, where you can also do things, and also the influence of macro level interventions like public health campaigns targeting mental health and policy. And in co-creation with stakeholders and lived experience groups, we developed innovative interventions and policy recommendations. We more and more work in teams, and in this second period, we'll have 3 teams. Each of them is led by one of the 3 constituting faculties. So one is in the Faculty of Natural Sciences and Math, and this focuses on translational effects of urban stress, on common mental disorders, and also on the effect of different interventions on brain and behavior. The medicine faculty will focus on these multi-level interventions on common mental disorders in the urban context, and we will look at modeling and optimizing personalized interventions in an urban context. Then we have all sorts of international collaborations. We started the International Center for Mental Health, city labs with different cities. We're part of an EU consortium on micro interventions in different European countries, how they can mitigate some of the effects of urban stress. And we also have an international goal, and this could be directly relevant for you guys, because it's also on scaling up interventions. And my colleague Claudie Bochting did work in Indonesia, where typically in low middle income countries, there's not enough people, therapists, to treat everyone who needs treatment. But what they looked at, also Lancet Psychiatry paper, is to what extent you can train lay people to actually deliver interventions that work, in this case for depression. We're interested to also do it for these other common mental disorders. I will end with a little 1-minute movie clip. I hope you can also hear it.
The majority of the world population lives in cities. Common mental disorders are becoming more prevalent in the Center for Urban Mental Health. We aim to see if these two are somehow interrelated.
So as a Center for Urban Mental Health, we try to unravel new pathways for intervention as well as policy making to improve mental health in urban settings. We analyze large data sets and we look at factors, genetic factors, but also environmental factors, like socioeconomic status, pollution, stressors.
In our interdisciplinary study, we get these data and start modeling these complexity science. Better understand mental health in the city and how we can change it.
There's an opportunity to develop interventions on individual, on group level, and on societal level.
So now you've been to Amsterdam in a minute. Isn't it amazing, all these new techniques we have? So here we have some of the faces. Of course, there's all these teams. So on the left, you see Claudie Bochting and myself, the 2 directors, and our coordinator and assistant. And then there's like 30 scientists involved in the whole center. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Professor Reinout Weers, for a very exciting overview of the center and for explaining the very systematic approach that you have to complexity science in pursuit of investigating mental health in the city. Next, I would like to call Dr. Shamil Khan, who is a consultant psychiatrist and founder of Compassion Couch Psychiatry and Therapy Clinic in Karachi. Dr. Shamil did his specialist training in psychiatry from Cambridge and East of England Deanery and has served as assistant professor and postgraduate training program director for psychiatry at Aga Khan University. Please welcome Dr. Shamil Khan.
Thanks, Dr. Adam, for the introduction. And today I'll be talking a little bit about urban mental health, but from a group analytic perspective. Adam introduced me as a psychiatrist, but I am also training to become a group psychotherapist. And I thought it's really important that during the course of your training, you apply some of those kind of theoretical principles in terms of understanding the contextual reality that you are living within. So the word that came to my mind, I mean, as soon as I actually thought about urban mental health was mohalla. And what is the kind of like the most approximate English translation of the word mohalla? And there were different kind of words which came to my mind. A colony, a neighborhood, a community. But I thought it was a combination of all the three together. Is it a physical space or a psychic space? Or it is a some combination of both? And from mohalla, which is a community, to mohalledari, which is kind of like a mohalla-based relationship, which is a very special kind of relationship, which I think most of the people in the auditorium could resonate or relate with. But I really miss some of my own memories of my old mohalla, which is the shared celebrations, the togetherness in grief and loss, the collective responsibility and the distributed ownership, right to say, but also the obligation of the people to listen as well. And then the tolerance for the difference between the communities who used to reside within that mohalla, and the nurturing of the bonds across those generations who used to live in that catchment area. I really miss that halwai, that dhobi, that darzi, that gali ki dukan wale uncle, the shopkeeper at the corner of the road, the women committees, as well as the evening meetups, the festivities, the sound of the dry food hawker or the mungphali wala, the echo of his bell tearing through the quiet ambience of a cold Karachi evening. So those are all the kind of like the subconscious memories which came to me as I was kind of preparing this presentation. The pretend plays of children, the night street cricket matches, and the load shedding moments, and then the hide and seek games. And as I was thinking about mohallas, I was thinking about group analytic theory as well. I mean, what is group analytic theory teaching us about community? And one of the theories is in relation to therapeutic communities, which is basically a theory and also an application of that theory in residential rehabilitative settings where people with enduring mental health problems, they are living under the same roof and they engage in very intensive group work or group therapy, and where community functions as a doctor. So it's a group-based, participative, non-hierarchical, democratic approach that brings awareness about the self as well as the group processes. And the approach aims to help people deal with social situations and to change perceptions that they have about their own self. But I thought that in our inherent mohalla as a unit, we had already the philosophy of the therapeutic community. We don't really need to transport or transplant the ideology or the philosophy of therapeutic community from the West. It was pre-existing already as an integral kind of like a foundation matrix of our society many years ago, although it is eroding now. The other thing which struck me was the changing architecture of Karachi. In the old mohallas, there would always be some kind of a transitional space, either in the form of courtyards or verandas, which symbolizes something in our culture, a space where outside meets the inside, the intersection of what's within with what's outside. And transitional spaces, if you look at the psychoanalytic literature, transitional object comes from the work of Winnicott, who describes that when the child is weaning from the mother, they're kind of like using an object to separate from the mother. These transitional spaces, they often used to be the playful spaces, where communities used to engage in singing, dancing, storytelling, barbecue, bonfire, etc. Some courtyards would often have a baithak or a sitting arrangement for guests who, for some cultural reasons, can't be entertained inside. So they would be entertained at a distance from the inside. A place where you can have a boundaried social intimacy with the strangers. But welcome to Karachi nowadays, which is now a concrete jungle. All these transitional spaces are no longer sort of operating the way they used to. The disappearance of transitional spaces, maybe worn down roundabouts here and there, which you can see, and the poorly maintained parks, which are far and few. What is the impact of such architectural mutations on the social psyche of a community? What does it mean in the context of urban living standards? And how can space be converted into a place? where people feel belong to, bonded and connected, not just with each other, but with different elements of their environment. I feel living in Karachi is like a social circus. But living in London when I was there was also a social circus, but there used to be some kind of a choreography of that circus. In Karachi, what I feel is that it's a circus where there is no choreography, there is no system in place. And the reasons could be because of the socio-economic disparity, unemployment, anger and resentment at resource allocation, impact of trauma, the tsunami of traffic that you have to face, and the assault on the senses that you have to bear every morning. Basic necessities being compromised, and the privilege and its exploitation. So I think these two concepts need to be explored from a psychoanalytic lens. What is citizenship versus mohallaship? And I feel as if the citizenship is an overarching ownership of the city and being a citizen of that city. And then within that umbrella, there are different mohallas which are coexisting with each other, contributing to each other's diversity, which is not a very uncommon concept. Within Karachi, there are the Gulshan Iqbalians, there are the North Nazmabadians, the DHians, but they all contribute to some kind of a rich tapestry and the diversity of the city. And last but not the least, we are talking about community, we are talking about the community spirit and the mohallaship, but then there is another aspect of groups, which is a very destructive form, and that relates to gangs. The gangs are groups which can be very dangerous, anti-therapeutic, even destructive. And we have seen that in different parts of the city, like Leari and all sorts of other areas. So why do people join gangs? And what are they actually looking for? And what happens when people feel in a state of identity diffusion, i.e. a state where they don't feel belonged, or they feel having not a sense of belonging? And what does that have an effect on their mohallaship or the citizenship, the compromised impact on that? But one thing which I just need to mention before we end, the main difference in between gangs and communityship is that in gangs there is almost a split in between us versus them. So we are the ones who have these kind of similar values, and therefore we understand better and we know better, and them are the enemies. But in mohallaship or in communityship, there is no us versus them, there is the us. And I think that in the changing landscape of Karachi, the urban mental health is seeing a lot of paranoid schizoid splitting between communities who are existing within the contextual setup. I think the conclusion is that group dynamics within the contextual playground of urban mental health needs socio-psychological exploration using different schools of thoughts, including group analysis, and important to identify, recognize, as well as preserve the foundation matrix of our urban communal living.
Thank you, Dr. Shamil. That was very enlightening, specifically the significance of looking at both the physicality as well as the sociality and the technicity of urban life and how that impacts mental health. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Saima Saif, who is Assistant Professor at the Department of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts at IBA Karachi. Dr. Saima has a PhD in clinical psychology, and she is a practicing clinical therapist and a very popular mentor for the SSLA program students. She will shed some light on her clinical exposure on the changing trends of urban mental health through the last decade, as she has witnessed in her therapy sessions.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Adam and Dr. Aisha, for formulating this panel. It was high time that we do see psychological problems from other perspectives also. We talk about mental health, psychological problems. We have started talking about it. It's important that we talk about it from a biopsychosocial lens also. So when we talk about mental health, we do discuss in depth what are the biological factors, what are the psychological factors, but somehow the social factors, they are underemphasized and under-discussed. So this panel is a great opportunity to discuss about that. What I will be particularly discussing today is sharing my personal anecdotes, how I see the urban landscape of Karachi is affecting the mental health of the people residing in Karachi. So Karachi is a place that welcomes everyone. Whoever wants to come here, earn a living, it never says no. So we see in turn rising population, and as a result, we see the landscape changing. So particularly if we look at this urban landscape from a cultural lens, so with my patients, particularly females, I would like to talk about that, joint family system. So what is happening is that what I observe among my patients, especially female, is that the urban landscape of Karachi, it is progressing, and our cultural reforms, they are not progressing the way they should be. Like, or we can say that the urban landscape is not taking into account the cultural context of our country, particularly Karachi. As Dr. Shamil talked about the mohallas and the transitional places, so what I see is that we have that culture of joint family system and this new urban landscape, and those joint family systems have now been squeezed into these 2-bedroom apartments with the thinking that, you know, our great grandparents, they all were very happy when they were living in the joint system, or there was a lot of support with that. So we move forward with that understanding, but we don't see what is happening here. Like when you are squeezed into a small apartment or into small residential area, you do not get those transitional places. Particularly if I talk about my female patients, I see patients, the females one, who are facing depression or anxiety because they do not have that privacy that they used to have before, or their grandmothers or grandparents were enjoying in these big residential areas. The lack of autonomy that is not there, the lack of boundary setting because there is so much family enmeshment over there, and for even smaller things you do not see that autonomy that as a person you crave for. So it leads towards different psychological problems. Similarly, what I've seen in the kids that come to me for counseling is that a lot of behavioral problems are there because of the urban landscape that we have. Let's say I remember this one case where the child had this problem with his mother. They had a conflict that the child wanted to go for cycling every day. And the mother was like, I cannot do that because where should he go? For him to cycle, I have to put his cycle in a car, go drive to a park, and then there he could cycle, you know. So you see that the lack of space for even for kids we have, like when you come out of the door of your house, you're stepping into a marketplace. So there is a lack of security for kids. There is a lack of green spaces for kids and the natural places for kids, which is leading towards different behavioral problems. So these two things related to the female patients and the kids that I observed, and what I would like to conclude with this is that in the future and currently, the urban design of Karachi should align with our cultural context also, whether that is a joint family system and the natural need of the kids also. Like they want to have places where they would go for physical activities and everything. And especially because when both the parents are working, the kids' physical activities, they are scheduled towards the weekend. So with kids, when they have this psychological need of having physical activities every day, you cannot tell them that, you know, we schedule your physical activities only on weekends. So that does lead towards a lot of oppositional behavior. That does lead towards a lot of hyperactivity. So what I would conclude with is that when we look at the mental issues of female patients or even children, we should look at other factors other than biological and psychological factors. The factors like the what kind of social factors we are providing them with, like the urban landscape and everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Salma, for emphasizing through your experience the very tangible link between urban space and the kind of urban culture that is inhabiting that space, right? And the gap that needs to be filled by architects, urban designers on each scale, from ergonomics down to regional and national master level planning, in order to understand what kind of society they're planning for, and to hence plan more effectively for voices that often go unheard, such as women in the household or children who just want to, run around or play all the time. So thank you for bringing those aspects to light. Next, we have Dr. Rabia Jafar, who is also a clinical psychologist with extensive experience in clinical therapy and practice at several institutions in Karachi. Dr. Rabia is currently a behavioral coach at the Department of Family Medicine at Aga Khan University Hospital in Karachi. And she will be talking about the socio-demographic variance and its significance for urban mental health. So, Dr. Rabia.
Thank you, Dr. Adam. Hello, everyone. So I think Dr. Shamil and Dr. Saima have covered the landscape of Karachi and how it's leading to mental health issues very well. I'll just go a step forward and start talking about the availability, the need and the availability of mental health help that we have within the city, kind of the demand and the supply, and how socioeconomic factors are leaning into it in terms of my experiences. So like Dr. Adam mentioned, that I am working at the Department of Family Medicine, currently at the Aga Khan University Hospital, meaning that I see mental health at the primary care level, which is a mix of both chronic cases and people in crisis. And I'm working as a behavioral coach, so I'm working with family physicians to help patients who need both long-term medications and behavioral support to make lifestyle changes and to deal with anxieties, depression, etc., that exacerbate those illnesses. So the ages range from adolescents to adults. Sometimes kids end up on my list. We're talking about social demographics, so that also ranges from low, middle to upper classes, at least for the first consultation. I'll talk about it ahead, and from all areas of the country. So let's start talking about the socio-economic factors. I think it's important to look at the hierarchy of needs. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but it just helps to visualize, right? So what's most important is your basic needs, your food, your water, shelter, and then you move on towards your safety and your security needs, right? So while you're struggling to fulfill these, you're not going to be concerned about your psychological needs, even though struggle for those needs is causing you psychological distress. So, I mean, safe to say poverty is rampant in our cities. Add to this the system we live in. So we're all constantly worried about basic necessities, right? Water, water, electricity, gas. So it's not with a particular group of people, it's across the board, right? So even if we have money, we're constantly worried about if we'll get gas today or not at the time we want it. And security obviously is compromised. So all of us are constantly struggling with our basic needs, but of course as you go down the ladder, it becomes worse. So here I would also like to quote a study by Dr. Rubina Kidwai. It was published in 2013, which was done with the mid-low and low-income communities in Karachi. They found that access to services and amenities had a small but significant association with decreased psychological distress. So here we have the empirical support that we need. Financial constraints are also the cause of lack of education and awareness. So for example, if I, as an educated person with access to the internet, have gained some understanding of how my emotions and behavior is connected, I can manage it better, even without professional help. Just regular frustrations and build-up. Like, I'm not talking about myself as a clinical psychologist, but just as a regular educated person with access to the internet, right? Because there's so much information out there. So we all have some understanding, all of us in this room at least. But people who are most vulnerable to this distress because of the struggle for the basic needs, they don't have access to the information that we're talking about over here. So in most cases, their feelings are displaced to people around them, right? So it becomes kind of a cycle. It causes distress in those people, and then from there onwards. Now, I'm not talking about abuse and trauma and major psychological disorders, but just basic anger and frustration, right? Although those are also important part of this whole thing. So moving on, how it is reflected in the clinics. like I mentioned earlier, that at least for the first consultation, there's people from all sorts of backgrounds that I see, but once it becomes clear that it is going to be a consistent, consequent effort to come in, money becomes a major factor. And not just in terms of the fee, but in terms of commute and other things. A lot of times they are seeking help for other physiological problems within the hospital, and they would rather spend the time, energy, money dealing with those. Accessibility to adequate help has also become an issue. People not living in larger cities, even when they want to seek help, report not having it available where they are. In a few cases, they have continued teleconsultations, but lack of privacy, internet issues, and general need for that physical in-person contact becomes a problem. So this was my short experience at AKU. But if I compare it with my experience at Institute of Clinical Psychology, where I was before that as a student, as a supervisor, what I noticed that retention to follow-up was better over there, even for long-term therapy. जो मैं अभी बात कर रही हूँ, in my clinics over here, I just work with short-term therapy, crisis management, helping people with lifestyle changes. So it takes about like 6 to 8 sessions. But जो मैं ICP की बात कर रही हूँ, that is more of an exploratory work. We take people for months, years, but people show up there. Although the work is done more by the PhD fellows and MPhil interns, but I feel people come there more consistently. I think Dr. Saima would agree with that, right? But given that the facility is not as well maintained, a lot of people, particularly from slightly better socioeconomic groups, are not willing to go there as well. So I think really it's a struggle between a well-managed environment and the availability and accessibility of competent help. And these people then fall prey to all the Neem Hakim, जिसको हम कहते हैं ना, like we've got a lot of them in our field now these days. So I think this gap that we have of having proper facilities and competent people, that is filled by inadequately trained people, I would say. So there's one group who is not able to afford the help at all, and even the awareness, basic. और दूसरा group है जिसको awareness भी है, help भी चाहिए, but there's lack of competent, good people they can go to. I face this issue a lot because मैंने जैसे बताया कि मैं short term clinic करती हूँ, तो जैसे ही मुझे realize होता है कि this person will need long term help, मेरे दिमाग में हर किस्म की calculation होना शुरू हो जाती है of what the person can afford, where the person lives, who would be a good person with a proper skill level to, you know, deal them with. And I mean, a lot of times I end up keeping those people with me for a session or two more while I find for those appropriate people rather than just sending them out there. Even within AKU, there's limited capacity to take everyone in. So there is the need, but I'm repeating it, but there's lack of adequately trained people. And yes, lack of male therapists. That is a major concern. As it is, males in our society, because of our societal cultural beliefs, are not as willing to go for help, and I think this further discourages them. Does not mean that men don't go for help, but I think if we had more male therapists, I think we would see a change in that. So I realize I've mentioned a lot of problems, and I have been thinking about solutions. The group work I felt was a very good answer to that. But I also feel if we can use our resources optimally, because what is happening right now, it's just a hodgepodge of skill level, competence level. Everyone is doing everything. A person with a PhD, with years of experience, is going about doing awareness sessions, which is okay, I'm not against awareness sessions, but I think students and people with lower competence level can do that work while you spend your efforts in the therapeutic work, jahan zyada need hai, or building approaches that we need for our own spaces and for our own systems. So that is the only thing that I could come up, but yes, there is economic disparity, systemic issues, lack of a centralized healthcare system. That is a lot we have to figure out still. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia, for your insights on the access and the ways in which people view and think about and then approach mental health care, especially when there is such diversity in socioeconomic differentiation of populations, right? You even have to think about how long this person can actually afford to continue therapy, not just in terms of the consultant's fee, but also in terms of the time that they take to commute and the cost of commute itself, and whether there is someone to actually bring them to that session, right? So a lot of females or children might not be able to continue therapy for a longer term. Our final panelist for today is Dr. Tanzil Shafiq. Dr. Tanzil is Assistant Professor of Urban Design and Co-Director of the Postgraduate Programs at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture. He is also an Associate of the Urban Institute at the University of Sheffield. Previously, he taught at the University of Melbourne and the University of Arkansas. His research looks at Southern urbanism, pluriversal architectural practice, and informal planning, focusing on the adaptation and transformation to climate change led by local citizens. Dr. Tanzil received a British Academy grant in 2021 to convene the Decolonial Cities Perspective, which is a transdisciplinary knowledge commons. Additionally, he also convenes the Platform for Just Housing and the Bangladesh Climate Alliance, which work towards housing and climate justice with local activists and citizens. Tanzil will talk today about the Viva Polis, the conceptualization of a city of life. Take it away, Tanzil.
Okay, can you confirm? Yes, I can see this. You can see the screen. Okay. Right. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon and good morning from here in UK. So I'll just talk in a more conceptual way to bring about some of the things that has been already put forward in the panel, relating to structural inequity, and of course from psychological perspectives. But I'll focus on a very particular aspect that I'm concerned about, which is the built environment. I mean, that's my specialization and how it's linked to this. So just to start about why I talk about urbanism and mass destruction. So when I was teaching in Arkansas in southern United States in 2015 and 16, based on my experience, and then there was always this talk about, weapons of mass destruction. So, I took that term and then I thought about the way that the American utopian dream had played out. So, this is the Journal of Urban Design and Mental Health. So I wrote this editorial back in 2017. It was just an articulation of what I was experiencing at that time, which I coined as this term as lonelytopia. So, this idea of loneliness as an epidemic in West, I mean, you can see it. So UK right now has appointed a minister for loneliness. In Japan, there is a term called hikikomori, which is that a lot of adult persons, they don't come out of the house for even 6 months. So even 1 million adults are undergoing this. And so loneliness has become sort of like an endemic in, highly industrialized, what we say the first world, also a very colonial term. So I was just imagining that, what is this, the necessity for social, social bonding and care, and then how it's related to this. And of course, as I'm preaching to the choir here. So all of you, of course, understand that, there is increased likelihood of survival when participants have stronger social relationships. And this has been, in the last 20 years, there has been a deluge of work coming out from, so this is Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, and he's a social psychologist. And this book, Social, even written for general audience, argues about how, he talks about inverting Maslow's pyramid, and he talks about how the social sort of often trumps the physiological needs at some points. So this idea that, psychologically and even physiologically, we are wired to connect, we are wired to collaborate. This is Michael Tomasolo's work. He's a comparative psychologist, and he looks at sort of, all this, talk about mirror neurons and all of that, but essentially, even from an like a sociological perspective, this is Richard Sennett writing about the rituals, pleasures, and the politics of cooperation, and the fundamental fact that human beings essentially have this capacity of shared intentionality. They can come together, do things together, and it gives immense pleasure. So all you see in indigenous, and in the pluriverse, in the many worlds across the world, you see this ability to come together to do things. And one of the major things that people come together to do is to make cities. Is what Dr. Shamil was talking about, is to make a city by coming up with a community, coming up with a mohalla, and you see how city has been made as a therapeutic community in itself. So, and in the last 50 years, you can start imagining in the neoliberal global order how cities have become produced. So this idea of an American dream where you have your own independent house that serves all the necessity, and this is from the 60s of how this idea of suburbia is sold in America. The reason I say that is because then this got transported all across the world as sort of like the best way that cities can be. And as you can see, even that, there is an essence of neighborhood. There is an essence of coming together, sharing. Even within that, you can have a sense of that. But what you get instead is a built form that looks like that, and eventually, yes. So independently, the house can have all the facilities. It can have it's all the physical necessities fulfilled, but the way the entire urbanism operates is devoid of that need of social cooperation, that you wouldn't be dependent on your neighbor for anything. So this absolute idea of an independence and the methodological individualism has really resulted in. So of course there is a lot of research on why this is bad for the environment, why this is difficult, but I'm talking about from what this produces as in the mental health aspect. So in America right now, I mean, this infographic, of course, I mean, the mental health situation is absolutely a disaster. I mean, half of adult U.S. population at some point in their life will have to see, see a consultant, have a consultation about the mental health. And this is clearly there is some linkage. So now I don't say that it's linearly caused. So the built environment is not an absolute causation. But as Dr. Weirs was talking about, there is determinants at different levels. And so there is multiple causation. So there is a lot of literature about how the built environment shapes the way that we think. That's very important. But of course, this is not to say that there is a direct causation, but the idea that this is very clearly linked about the way that we build cities and our mental health, which is why this idea of a necropolis, this idea is, the way that the cities are being made is for, if it's about maximization of profit, if it's about maximization of, certain developers building cities at a scale that is beyond a sense of community can be fostered, essentially we are creating cities that foster death. And that death can be taken in many different ways, of course, an individual, personal, and at a level, but also a societal and a sort of like a cultural death as well. So this is, taken from the idea, the work of Achille Mbembe, who talks about necropolitics. But then I'm interested, this is how I conceptualize that. This is what I see based on, my experience in America first, but also Australia and the UK, and that it affects a large range of, cities across. So, and then the idea that this was exported to all over the world, this idea that, you could produce cities at a scale, at an absolutely staggering scale, and then still have that sense of community. And of course, it's not possible. You couldn't. So, you can go and buy housing as a commodity, but it's very difficult to foster a sense of what Dr. Shamil talked about as a therapeutic community, to be like that. And you can see that urbanism of mass destruction. So in Mexico, but these ghost cities in China, that you don't have the community, but you just build. So you can start to imagine what is the urban health or the mental health in these locations. But of course, this is not just there. I mean, it hits home. So this can be seen across all localities. So this has been the globalization of that urbanism of mass destruction. why do I want to say, sort of like to bring together that another way of doing things is possible? Another way of thinking about survivor, it's from the Latin root, from life. So a city where life is possible or life is fostered. So this is essentially taken from the idea of buen vivir, or the idea of collectively living well. So how does a city do that? Can we think of cities other ways, beyond the way that we think it's normal, the way that the neoliberal way that we feel is the only way of making cities? And I end my presentation from the place that I'm really attached to. So this is the largest informal settlement in Dhaka, called Korail in Bangladesh. And, my long-term ethnography work there, what I see is that the way that the city operates and is being made by the people, despite how the state wants to evict them, wants to cleanse them, wants to take the land away. And there are 55,000 families here. And you see just an example of how the state came in and then bulldozed the entire land, and immediately on the edge of the lake, and immediately how people took that land on and started cultivating. And this very small scale repair of that landscape, of landscaping, of urban gardening and farming, how it brought the community together, how it became that the spaces that was talked about before in this panel, about all the small scale fostering of community bonds, how that was done through against the government and against the state by urban farming, as simple as that. But this has been, so there has been this, I kept seeing these ideas of repair, that everyone came together and all these acts. So reconstruction, there is a fire, everyone comes together, rebuilds, and all of that has a very strong impact on social bonds, on community bonds, and even the idea that they come together to protest for their rights in the city. So for me, and then this was during the pandemic, that we saw a lot of care work of coming together and helping each other out, and how that had a sense of resilience that didn't even happen in the upper class areas. So, of course, there is no empirical data about the mental health that I cannot provide, but I can give intuitively a sense that a lot of this care work helped in their mental resilience throughout the pandemic. And that, for me, we can start thinking about all these rearrangements that allow us to collectively live well. And I'll just like to stress the point that was made today about, that there are all these interconnected factors, and we see it from our own discipline, and often we think that that's the only way of, that's the only factor. And of course, you start to see from this great interdisciplinary panel that it's all sort of, the bio and the social and the material and the psychological of how it's a nested relationships that allow either to foster a great mental health or sort of foster death in a wide sense. So I leave you with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful and graphically very appealing presentation, as always, Tanzil. And since we only have 15 minutes, I would like to open the floor to the audience if they have any questions or comments. I would like to request you to please mention your name, and if you want, mention the panelist who you would like to address your question. So.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Afakli, student of law, actually. I'm very happy to be here at the very insightful session on urban mental health. Sir, I want to ask from the panel that keeping in mind all the factors, the physical, like the traffic jam, especially of the Karachi, and all the socio-economic and other factors like poverty and the transport system, keeping all these things in mind, what are the ways that we, especially students, can keep our mental health at proper level? Thank you.
Is there a particular panelist you want to answer, or is it open for all? Would anyone like to take it first? So the gentleman asked, that living in Karachi, how can we, keep our mental health sane?
So I'm assuming you're just talking about general distress and not about any major. So I think, see, we all have a lot of commitments. We have a lot of, I think, deadlines and all to fulfill. फिर बाकी सारी चीजें मिला के it becomes a thing. So I think the first thing is to be generally aware of what a thought is, what a feeling is. We can confuse the two, right? And when we're feeling something, we get overwhelmed by it. So if I can give you one tip over here, rather than getting overwhelmed by that feeling, just stop yourself and just try to differentiate between your thought and your feeling. And then try to work from there. Uske alawa, just keep on, I think, wohi sari cheezein, honestly, I'll say, keep manage your time better, what you see, keep mindfulness, all of that. So I think there's a lot of information about that outside, mindfulness, etc. But I think that is where we get stuck. We get really overwhelmed and we don't see what's behind that overwhelm.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. I am here, Mir Mukhtiar Hussain, and from Karachi University. Here, ma'am. To talk about you talk and mental health. This session was basically about mental health, but I want to connect this session with physical health, which is in urban areas due to junk foods and these kind of the foods which are not good about health. How can we rank these food and for the mental health, especially these kind of the for oily foods?
So your question is basically that how can you stop eating the junk food, right? So I would say it has to be, like, it depends on your will. So if we connect it, like, there would be many advertisements related to when you go from university to your home, you will see so many billboards. So one tip, like Dr. Rabia shared, I would share with you is that you would get more tempted towards these junk food when you are starving. So in your hectic routine, try to manage your food, like when, in specific hours have that, don't you overstarve yourself so that you don't get tempted towards these junk food, and remind yourself you need healthy food for your physical as well as mental health.
Yeah, I can add something here. Do you hear me?
Go ahead.
My question is from all panelists. My question is open for all. The question mostly about from the Dr. Shamil Khan. Sir, thank you so much. We are living here in Karachi, but you have reminded us our daily life of our mohalla. So my question is, the panelists all have discussed the challenges and the issues regarding mental health, but could you please share or suggest any pragmatic roadmap for government or for common people awareness to keep clean these urban cities of Pakistan, like Karachi and Lahore? Currently, you see Lahore, mostly in urban areas in Pakistan, because Pakistan is an Islamic country, an Islamic state. So here in Karachi or in other urban areas, mostly women, they keep surrounded by four walls of home. Only we can say they are household wives, housewives. So how could we suggest them to be aware about their health, mental health? That's it.
Question. I believe the gentleman is asking about specific socio-cultural demographics, specifically women who are confined to the house, perhaps for generations. Perhaps that's something that they are accustomed to in their families. So women who don't work, who necessarily are not employed, and who have a different set of problems. So how do you cater to their mental health? Also keeping in mind that they might have come from non-urban context, and just arrived in an urban context after marriage. So how do you cater to those mental health issues?
So I've not seen, जैसे आपने कहा कि वो लोग घर से इतना निकलती ही नहीं है. So I can't say I have seen a lot of it in the clinic. The few that I have, yes, बल्कि recently I saw someone who was really used to living in a मतलब a semi-urban कह लें उस जगह को, कि वो यही कह रही थी कि जब my husband was there, let me tell you this case, okay, yeah, that reminds me. So तो जब उनके हस्बैंड थे वो उधर रहती थी उनके बच्चे, और फिर आसपास से मोहल्ले से रिश्तेदार ये वो, it was a constant buzz of people coming into her house and going, and she would cook all day, but she would love it because एक रौनक थी घर में, ठीक है. Then her husband passed away and the son had to move to Saudi. So उन्होंने कहा मैं आपको अकेला तो नहीं छोड़ सकता इधर, तो वो उनको साथ ले गए. अब वो गई हैं, वो शहर में भी नहीं थी, वो एक कोई सेमी अर्बन जगह पे थी जहाँ पे सब पास में थे और वो एक एक्टिव लाइफस्टाइल से. She went to this place where she's just in the home with 5 people, and so she came in the clinic and she was really depressed and she was just like मैं क्या करूँ, और मुझे like so there are obviously concerns. She couldn't live like that. What I helped her with was to help her create spaces within her limitations, right? कि वहाँ पे जैसे पोता पोती हैं उनके साथ आप किस तरह से उस space को create कर सकते हैं, spending time with them. What else is outside? अगर आप apartment unit से थोड़ा निकले, जो हम creating मोहल्लास वाली जो बात हो रही है ना, so I mean 1-2 units तो हैं, close Pakistani families live together, who's there, who's not. I think someone has to make that first step to get out there. I mean, yes, housewives are at home. I think we need to encourage them more to build these small pockets of communities within them so that they have that shared place, I would say.
Another point I want to add is that before COVID, I would see like the patients would come and they would come for, especially the female women you're talking about, they would come for 1 or 2 sessions, and then their greatest worry would be that if we have to come here for in-person therapy, that's 1 hour, then the commute, that's at least 3 hours. So we don't have that much time to take out every week for a therapy. So I think COVID had a lot of negative consequences, but there were some positivities also. We could finally exploring the idea of online therapy. And currently, I see a lot of female patients who have this issue of commute, independently commuting or not having enough time, so they are taking therapy online, and that is a plus point.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Imran Khan. I'm a PhD scholar at AERC. My question is about the connection of mental health with the current situation of Karachi. I think it is now a little bit normal in Karachi, but what I see on YouTube sometimes, that there is a lot of evidence about snatching in Karachi. So it's a kind of very connected phenomena with the mental stress, that every biker behind you and you will see, oh, this is the one who is going to snatch me. So do we have any kind of evidence that can show that the more evidence of snatching in the cities, and the bad is the mental health of the people in the cities? Thank you very much.
The evidence to suggest that there are people who have come to our clinic with symptoms suggestive of trauma. Even in my own family, I mean, we don't really have to go to see all this pathology out there in the clinic. Snatching and mugging and being looted is so endemic in Karachi these days that each and every other household would know someone who has been looted on a street or nearby their homes. And then you see how patients kind of like, or even family members, they are suffering with symptoms suggestive of trauma, like PTSD, like avoidance of those situations, anxiety, somatic symptoms which are bodily symptoms. which are very common in some catchment areas of Karachi where there is not that much of awareness about mental health issues. And not just in Karachi, if you go outside Karachi into Balochistan, the nature of the violence and the trauma there is very different. So there are all those kind of like symptomatologies and clinical presentations that you do see of patients who come to the clinic for seeking help. But when you go into their histories, then you realize what could be, what was the triggering event or what was the triggering insult or the trauma.
Thank you. And because we are running short on time, I would like to have a concluding question for Professor Reinaut about the applicability of complexity science as an approach to contexts of the global south, specifically where public data is not readily accessible. And how do you think researchers or academics or practitioners even can apply a complexity science approach, or is it something that might help us to better understand or model or curate for our mental health in our cities? So how do you operate in a vacuum of data, let's say particularly?
Thank you. Do you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Now, I wanted to add earlier, but then it didn't come through. Yes, so, well, first of all, there is data. So in our Lancet Psychiatry paper, we also included many countries from the Global South. But you could argue there may be less data when it comes to communities or neighborhoods or Mahula, very interesting also, but to the extent that they still exist. I think the framework that we present is useful also very much in the Global South. And as I mentioned, we're also really interested in potential collaborations where you use some of the new techniques. For example, we are working on chatbots for mental health also, where we use AI, and that needs to be supervised because you can get all sorts of totally weird conversations otherwise, but maybe not by a very expensive or rare professional, but maybe we can train lay people also. So in that sense, there are really possibilities also to use this type of technology and the broader framework in the Global South. And I also totally applaud the other contributions in terms of city building as really a crucial aspect. So we are also talking with the community of Amsterdam, where I think there is awareness for the need for common spaces, but yeah, it can definitely be improved. And I think this really is an important thing globally. And yeah, some of the real fast growing cities are in the Global South and in China, and there it seems, at least at this moment from a distance, to be less of a priority. So I think there's really a lot we can do here. Of course, you first need to reach the right people who are into the city planning, but yeah. So hopefully, and actually, so not everyone has access to Lancet Psychiatry, but you can, from our website, you can also download the paper and look at the other stuff. So I think it was on the last slide, it's urban mental health.
Yes, thank you for that, Professor Weers. We actually taught that paper in our last lecture in our urban mental health class, if some of our students remember. So thank you. And I believe we are coming to a close, so a few thanks are in order. I thank the CBER team, Hassan, Shagufta, Shabana, Dr. Junaid, and our Dean, Dr. Asma Haider, for their facilitation throughout this panel. I'm also grateful to our international speakers, Dr. Tanzil and Professor Weers, for joining across time zones from the UK and the Netherlands for their online presentations. Thank you to the panelists physically present here, Dr. Shamil, Dr. Saima, Dr. Rabia, and a special thanks to Dr. Aisha Zia, Assistant Professor at Clinical Psychology at IBA, who co-curated this panel with me and procured most of the psychology experts here. And finally, to the audience for your attention and your very genuine and very provocative questions. I wish you all a pleasant weekend. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye-bye.